for the Bronx to become a hub of technology, innovation, and startup activity, we do have to do the work now, very early, to provide young people in the Bronx with knowledge, skills, and experiences necessary to become active participants in remaking their own futures, and by that, through that, a more promising future for their community. We've all seen the statistics about the number of jobs that are increasingly going to require at least an associate's, if not a bachelor's degree. And unfortunately, our graduation rates in New York City's highest need communities really still point to some very wide disparities in employment prospects and economic opportunity. For example, the Bronx does unfortunately still have the lowest graduation rate today of all of the state of New York's counties. In 2012, the four-year graduation rate for Bronx-based students was only 55%, compared with Brooklyn at 65, Manhattan 67, Queens 68, and Staten Island 75%. Maybe that bridge is actually doing something good over in Staten Island. We talked about it earlier. But the point is that even 75% is frankly too low. And these are rates that we're talking about of graduating within 4 years. Now, some people do, of course, go back to school through a GED or other kinds of credit recovery programs. But just think about how difficult it is to be successful if you don't even finish high school in 4 years. And unfortunately, the opportunities that will exist in the new economy are going to exclude a growing number of these young people, especially in our lowest income areas like the Bronx, unless we improve this. There was an interesting report that came out by the Manhattan Borough President's Office last year called Startup City, Growing New York City's Entrepreneurial Ecosystem, which really underscores this point. I'll just quote a brief passage from that. It says, despite its rich history, it is clear that large swaths of today's entrepreneurial ecosystem are going to lie beyond the reach of millions of working-class New Yorkers, contributing to an unemployment rate of in excess of 10% and rising poverty unless we do something about the educational system within the city schools. I think the good news is we all agree that our most valuable asset for the future are young people today. They're our next generation of business workers, community leaders, our workforce. They're our consumers and the future drivers of our economy. And so really we are obligated to do all that we can, not only for their interest, but for our own self-interest, to prepare them to be productive, participating members of society. And I think today's events, or events like today's summit, bring together the best minds in the public and private sector to develop collaborative solutions to ensure some of these outcomes. As business leaders, entrepreneurs, and educators, we are in the best position to illustrate the direct and tangible benefits of entrepreneurship and business education. So I really will leave you with sort of three things I think that we can do together that will really help move us forward in this process. One is to expand entrepreneurship education opportunities to more Bronx students and schools, and indeed schools throughout the cities, through partnerships with organizations such as Junior Achievement. But we need all businesses and organizations, whether they're startups, whether they're well-established businesses, whether they're institutions of higher learning like Fordham University, to help in this effort. We need to, secondly, teach kids to be 21st century thinkers and able to recognize problems and opportunities and understand the complex and varied systems in which those problems and opportunities exist, to weigh the pros and cons of potential solutions and then proceed with enacting the right solutions to these issues. Young people's worlds are going to be marked by an uncertainty and the kind of issues, challenges, and careers and potential opportunities that many of us of a different generation cannot even begin to imagine. We really have to help young people think about education as a lifelong process where they're constantly adapting to a changing environment while at the same time upgrading their skills and their knowledge base to remain relevant in that environment. And then lastly, I think more specifically for the issue here in the Bronx, I'd like to think about mobilizing local technology companies to specifically work with young people here in the schools in the Bronx, to be role models and mentors and represent and show the way toward possible career possibilities and opportunities. Local companies can also play a great role by bringing and exposing young people to the technology that they need to learn and understand. We still have, a shortage of that kind of technology in the physical plants of the schools that the kids go to. But if the kids can get out to local businesses and work with the technologies that these businesses are working with, they get the kind of hands-on education that they can't just get from sitting in a classroom. But I think that if we all work together and implement actions like these, there's no reason why the Bronx can't live up to its great potential of being a thriving community where all of its citizens are educated, trained, and prepared to take their place in a digital economy of the future. Thanks very much. If we have time, I'll take a question or two, but I'm not sure how long. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Joseph, thank you very much for that. I think a couple of important notes that I took are just a reminder that this community of entrepreneurs does have a very great responsibility to those coming in the next generation role that we can play. And I think you gave some great examples of very practical programs that we can all try to learn from and try to expand on. That's a role that all of us should take very seriously. I'd now like to invite Philip Shearer, who's the director at Sign New York City? Scenic. Sorry about that. Please, the podium is yours.
Hi, how are you? This is my first time speaking in company, so don't freak out right now. But so my name is Philip M. Shearer, and I'm a director at a media and technology company located in Mott Haven in the South Bronx. We're currently looking for investors to expand our operations. So I'd like to start by saying that I'm not originally from the Bronx. So what you're going to hear is very much the perspective of a global citizen who has fallen in love with the Bronx. I was born in France to parents of Scottish and French origins. My mother was born on a small African island east of Madagascar, and my father was born in Casablanca in Morocco. And then growing up, I lived in the United States in Ithaca, New York, in Indianapolis, Detroit, Westchester County, New Rochelle, Manhattan, and then around the world in Paris, France, Mexico City, London in England, and Tokyo in Japan. So now I live and I work in the Bronx, where I run one of the very few startups centered on digital technology. We've had our offices and studios on Ryder Avenue and 137th Street, which is one block west of 3rd Avenue. So all the way at the southern tip of the Bronx for 8 years now. And actually part of the team is here today. Shanez, right there, if you wouldn't mind standing up, is in charge of community engagement. So she's very much put the company on the path to get us here today. And then in the back over there, handling a digital camera is Stu, who's the director of design and technology. So what you're going to hear today is a series of observations and big ideas that are the result of running a tech startup in the Bronx for the past 8 years. I was at this event last year, and there were no startups. either as speakers or on the panel. So there's definitely been some progress there, but I would like to thank Fordham University, the Gabelli School of Business, and the Center for Digital Transformation, and then a very warm thank you to RP and Bob for giving us an opportunity to speak today. So I insist on the fact that I am an outsider to the Bronx. I've noticed that that's a very important thing to be aware of, working in this borough and living here. But also because that the background that I have gives me a global perspective on whatever I see, wherever I see it. And I believe, I hope that that puts me in a position to tell you that I think most of the people in this borough, but also most of the people in New York City, do not fully realize how important the Bronx already is to the world economy. For me, digital technology is a set of tools. It's a means to get to an objective. And so for the purposes of this discussion here, the objective is for the Bronx to transform itself in the 21st century using digital technology. So the next 10 minutes, I'm going to explain what I think the major advantages are in the Bronx in fundamental terms as a location, but also from a digital technology perspective. Then I'll explain what I think can and should be done in order to leverage these advantages that we already have. And finally, I'll highlight three major challenges that I can see after this 8-year experience to making the 21st century Bronx into a reality. So the first advantage is that the Bronx is already a worldwide brand. Now, unfortunately, that worldwide reputation is more negative than positive. In fact, in France, in French, there's an expression. The expression is "c'est le Bronx," which means this is a total mess. So, a negative reputation can be switched. Switch it, and that's what marketing can do. So it's what it's for, in fact. But the important thing there is that the Bronx is already a worldwide brand. And that's a very difficult thing to build. It takes a very long time. So already having it is a huge advantage. The second big advantage is that there's a lot of space in this borough. You've got 1.4 million people who live here. That's a little under the population of Manhattan, but there's twice the geographical area. So there's a lot of space in general, and there's also a lot of affordable commercial space, which is actually the number one reason that we moved to the Bronx in the beginning, is because we needed to build media studios, and there was just no way that we were going to do that, even in Brooklyn, where rent would be 2 to 5 times as high. So the space is a major factor, and where we are on 138th Street, we're 25 minutes away from Union Square. On the 405 train, that's closer than parts of Brooklyn, for example, that are developing much faster in technology regard. So as far as location, the Bronx is a great location. And then finally, the third major advantage is that the Bronx is a microcosm of the future of American cities. So it's really the ideal case study of how urban transformation can happen in the 21st century. 56% of the population speaks Spanish. It's an increasingly important population group, both in terms of the workforce and in terms of the customer base. So the overall population does not have enough access to education, especially the mostly underprivileged population. And in particular, there's very, very little access to information technology, which echoes the comments of Mr. Perry, which is we've actually been involved recently in a grant application process for the New York City Housing Authority for Mott Haven. And from the feedback that we're getting, from interacting with residents and different constituents. The access to digital technology is relatively poor. Now, the only really part of the population that has embraced digital technology is the youth population, which spends a considerable amount of time, apparently, text messaging and playing video games, which is all part of the digital ecosystem. So if anything, that youth population is already showing the way. So leveraging what we have, well, I'd like to say that internet technology really is changing the world. And for me, it's not just about gadgets or something really cool like the iPhone. There's a phenomenon worldwide that's giving, I think, a massive opportunity. And there's a window of time, I think, whereby learning computer programming, in particular, speaking the language of computers, any population, and in particular an underprivileged population, can entirely reverse their fate and take power, in fact. And computers are not very expensive compared to investing in large machines that make cars. For example, it's pretty affordable. And then you need a number of people who have knowledge in order to pass on that knowledge. So education is very much a key part. So based on the past 8 years, I think that in the Bronx specifically, there's an extraordinary opportunity for a deep partnership between local government and elected officials, organizations that sit between private interests and public interests, and local businesses, hopefully including startups, private investors, then large and established technology companies such as Google, Apple, Verizon, Time Warner, and educational institutions to come together, to work together, and with the specific goal of empowering Bronxites. And I see this empowerment as a two-step process. The first thing is that I think we need to make certain that the Bronxites understand how important they already are to the entire world, because we need to have confidence in ourselves and in our ideas. I say ourselves because I now live here, so I consider myself a Bronxite even though I'm not from here. And I think nothing can get done if we don't have confidence. I think it's worth noting, and that's why there's a subway train with graffiti on it as the first slide. The Bronx is really the town that invented hip-hop culture, whether it's rap music, the musical component, or the visual component, graffiti writing. And hip-hop culture, street culture is a global establishment today. Generates hundreds of billions of dollars in sales annually, worldwide. And as an example of this, I'd like to point out Gangnam Style, which, how many people have seen Gangnam Style in this room? Quite a few, right? So it's the most successful online music video ever made, and it's made by a South Korean artist. You can tell if you've seen the video that it's not chiefly influenced by country music. It's chiefly influenced by hip-hop culture. So the Bronx is at the origin of this. So that's how important the Bronx already is to cultural expression worldwide. So I think we need to remake the image of the Bronx and make sure that its inhabitants get the credit that they deserve, instead of the borough just having negative reputation. So that's the first step. The second step is to leverage this fact that the majority of youth have already embraced digital technology, and they're far more interested in digital screens than they're interested in blackboards. So, they've already adopted this new way of living. And if you couple that with the fact that there's a lot of space in this borough, what I would like to propose is to create a technology center. In other words, this would be a large project to either renovate existing physical space or build something from scratch. Something big that would be covered around the world. So it'd be similar to the Haiti Planetarium at the Museum of Natural History, except here it'd be centered on computers and new media, and by extension, technical knowledge. It'd be a place for established technology companies who we would entice to participate, to showcase their inventions, but also to participate directly in the education of of what is effectively their future workforce, as well as their future customer base. So you'd have classes and workshops, and it's not just math and science, although that is, of course, incredibly important. I mean, if you could convince a teenager who spends a lot of time playing video games, who might be interested in developing video games, if you can convince that person that math and science is the way for them to get to the point of actually making video games, then that's one more person who's going to be most likely very successful in the long run. So math and science are incredibly important, but the other part of it is really specialized manual labor. It tends to be undervalued these days with this whole digital revolution. But learning how to make things, which leads to manufacturing companies and manufacturing jobs, including learning how to cook, make food. There's definitely nutrition-related health issues in this borough. So that is also, you're still making something. And in general, learning how to use your body and your hands. So arts and crafts, soldering electronic components to actually make computers, working with materials like wood and metal, and in general, just an array of different technical skills. And you could have celebrities from different industries, people who have been successful in these different industries, come and animate these workshops with youth, as Joseph was saying, that's a great way to engage the youth population. So that's the grand plan. Very large physical space focused on technology, education, and learning how to use your mind and body to make things. In general, I'd also like to say that the way any entrepreneur sees the world, every problem is an opportunity. The lady from Guild said exactly the same thing. I think that's exactly right. So really, the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. And there are a lot of unused buildings in our borough, and that means that at some point they will probably have to be renovated. And if we're going to renovate them, then we could focus on using new technology like green roofs, solar power, and make sure that the upcoming generation knows how to either build that technology or use the technology or both. So as a general approach, and here I speak from sort of experience in the borough, trying to push things forward, get things done. Instead of obsessing about our problems, we use the fact that we indeed have considerable problems in the borough to transform the borough for the 21st century. And then once again, the Bronx will be leading the way, just like it did with hip-hop culture 40 years ago. But this time we just have to make sure that everybody knows that it's happening. And the Bronxites get the credit that they deserve. So in general, I think it's time to reap the benefits of the cultural investments that were made back in the 70s and 80s, and to make new investments, but this time in technology infrastructure and in our workforce. So of course there are challenges here, and large challenges. The first one is avoiding the typical story of gentrification, because that's ultimately a problem with any such plan is that you end up having a bunch of people who get kicked out and displaced. And I think in the Bronx there's an opportunity to empower the community itself and develop industry with current residents. And I think if that's not a focal point of any such initiative, then it will get lost and the typical process will happen as it always does. I think in order to guarantee that, and that's challenge number 2, everybody has to work together. I think that's been something that we found to be challenging over the past 8 years. It's pretty difficult, and even though I have much praise to say about the hustle and the benefits that the approach of hustling bring, I think it also, we kind of have to see bigger, because the hustle kind of gets you to the next day or the next week or the next month, and that's incredibly important. But as a borough, I think that we need to see large, big, because we can, because there are the makings of something extraordinary here. So even though the hustle is important, I think that a wider view is also key. And then the third challenge, and this is the one that I really don't have an answer for, but is if you're going to involve large corporations directly in an educational curriculum, you run the risk of creating people who mostly know about Google, which is an excellent thing to know, but still risky. So how do you make sure that education remains education and doesn't just become corporate training? So the third challenge is a large one, and I understand that these are very ambitious challenges to overcome, but for having lived all over the world and seen many different situations, many different types of people, I think if there's one place in the world that I've been to where these challenges can be overcome, it's right here in the Bronx. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you. That's a very bold vision, which I, for one, am quite eager to embrace. I think you've given us a lot to think about, really from the perspective of the Bronx. Excellent, excellent. I'd now like to invite Andrew Kingsley, who's the CEO of the Concourse Group, also local, and I'm sure we'll have similar good things to share with us. Do you have a presentation, Joe? Okay.
So my name's Andrew. I'm a recent graduate of Fordham University, and I'd like to thank RP and Mr. Gatch for inviting me to share some of my thoughts on opportunities and challenges that I've seen over the past 2 years that I've been here in the Bronx. And I've been working in banking, which is sort of interesting here in the Bronx because people are very underserved. On the agenda, I'm going to talk about 2 challenges and an opportunity that I see here in the Bronx. The first challenge being the unbanked populations here in the Bronx and throughout New York City. The second being failing institutions that presumably could service this population. And then third, I'm going to talk about microfinance as a means to battle poverty and what digitization means for the sector and how banking is changing here in the United States. So what I want to begin with is that 2.5 billion adults, that's just over half the world's population, lack access to formal financial services. That includes savings, credit, insurance, and markets. And if you think about that, starting a business or buying a home or even going to college is nearly impossible. So the economic gap is even bigger because people don't have access to financial services. So you talk about a big challenge, this is a huge challenge, and it's also a huge opportunity. And many of you might think that this is just in sub-Saharan Africa that this happens, but it turns out in New York City, 1 in 10 New Yorkers are completely unbanked. And I would go further to say that 1 in 5 New Yorkers are underbanked, which means that they use a combination of formal financial services like a bank account and informal financial services like the check casher. In the Bronx, where we sit, the darker areas represent higher concentrations of and underbanked. It's actually 56% of the population is unbanked here in the Bronx. It's the poorest congressional district in the country, and there's a couple reasons for people not having bank accounts. It's actually 2 primary reasons, and I want to point to an interesting graph that I really like. It actually depicts median income as you travel along the 4 train in New York City. So as you move from central Brooklyn through the Upper East Side of Manhattan and into the Bronx, you can see that median income drops from over $100,000 to under $20,000 pretty much instantaneously. So here in the Bronx, average income is just above $18,000. That's below the poverty line, and I would basically say that that's the major correlation to being unbanked. There's a second variable that's included in this factor, and it's race and ethnicity. The majority of people who are unbanked are either Latino or Black. And 70% of the population that are unbanked here in New York City, they're immigrants. So we're looking at poor immigrant families, mostly here in the Bronx and central Brooklyn and Harlem. So let me tell you a little bit about the financial landscape and financial institutions and why banks don't exist here in the Bronx. Here is a map on the left depicting concentrations of bank locations here in the poorer areas of New York City, or actually all over New York City. The darker areas represent higher concentrations, and obviously the lighter areas the opposite. And banks really don't want to serve poor people. It's unprofitable. People with lower incomes have a variability in income streams. They don't have a lot of assets to put in the bank, and they have a higher propensity to overdraft, which ultimately is a cost on the institution, and thus they don't want to serve them. The people that fill the gap are the check casher. The check casher charges 1.7% for every check that you cash in, as a customer. And somebody making less than $20,000 a year, it's actually cheaper to use the check casher as opposed to the bank. So that's why we see this issue. Many people think that the check casher is predatory, but I would go to say that they're not so predatory here in New York City because they cannot offer payday lending, which is really the real issue. There are other institutions that exist in these poor areas, and they're actually called microcredit unions. They're not-for-profit, federally insured financial institutions that are cooperatively owned and can provide savings, insurance, and credit to the unbanked populations at a cheaper rate than a bank. The trouble is that many of these credit unions are failing. The reason that they're failing is because they were chartered in 1960 by one man, and oftentimes that guy is still running the credit union and using a manual ledger, which is nearly now a giant tome that sits in the basement of a church, and it's really impossible for them to offer convenient and up-to-date services to their populations. So it's really a pipe dream to think that they're going to offer online banking or debit cards at a cheap rate to the underserved populations, because this guy just is still struggling with the manual ledger. And the regulators know this. They say, okay, you're a tiny institution and we're going to shut you down because you're a burden on us, it's high cost to the government, and you're not really providing any services. So you can see this decline in FDIC or federally insured institutions across the United States, and the majority of the decline has come from institutions under 100 million because they're not really offering great services to the population. So we got started. I am a startup nonprofit here in the Bronx. We're a micro lender. And we got started by simply matching students from Fordham University with these microcredit unions on the premise that a Fordham finance student or accounting student could transform the books from the credit union from a manual ledger to an Excel spreadsheet. We had 50 people interested, and I just sent them out. I said, have at it. Just go and be really enthusiastic and be awesome and change the world of banking. It turns out that this became unwieldy, and they were not offering good services to these people, and it became more of a burden. So we decided to institutionalize this. So I built a team of 5 who are much smarter than I am. And we offer 3 main services and really thought about how are we going to fix these institutions and ultimately be unbanked. So the first thing that we offer is credit union and CDFI consulting, which stands for Community Development Financial Institutions, which I'll talk about in a second. Then we offer entrepreneurship education and one-on-one consultation. And then third, we are a lender to the people who graduate our consultation or entrepreneurial courses. So let me talk about what we do with small credit unions. The first thing that we do is we offer internal control and shore them up so that they're not going to be shut down by the regulator. It's as simple as putting a student and a professional in the banking industry on the supervisory committee so that they can file a dormant account report. Basically, to keep them open and functioning. And really the best way that we can fix the credit union is to provide them investment opportunities. So this is where digital startups and businesses come into play for us. Oftentimes, this small credit union has $500,000 in assets just sitting around and really is required by the government to invest in commercial lending, consumer lending, and small business lending. So that's your vacation loan, a small business loan, and a real estate loan to a property here in the Bronx. So where do we invest that money? Well, it turns out between here and the 4 train, it's the 5th busiest corridor in terms of foot traffic in New York City. And there's $690 million of untapped retail sales in that corridor alone. So it seems that right outside the gates of Fordham, it's a pretty damn good place to invest. So what we're trying to do is we're located across the street in the Fordham Foundry, which is Fordham's business incubator. It's recently launched in last November, and we run 3-day startup events. So usually people come in on Friday evening. We have 40 participants, all from the Bronx, mainly drawn from local colleges and universities, including Lehman, Monroe, and Mount St. Vincent's. And they come in 40 strong, and they all give a business pitch on Friday evening. And the 5 best businesses are selected. Teams are self-selected around those ideas. And then for the remaining 56 hours, they're partnered with mentors. They're given tons of Red Bull, and we just power through. And they write on the wall and play with Rubik's Cubes and run around with unicycles. And then on Sunday, they get up in front of a panel of local credit union loan officers, incubators, and New York City small business solutions to pitch their idea. And so it's a great experience, just to get in there. And more often than not, they're not going to be funded right there on Sunday on the spot. So what we do is we take graduates of this course, partner them with Fordham students to help them become part of this digital economy. Fordham students don't know how to program. We don't have really a robust engineering program here, but they do know how to start a website. And they can also get them in touch with Square. And they can get them a YouTube video so that they can put their products on Etsy or Kickstarter. And so that is something that's imperative for any business to start, and something that an undergrad at Fordham can do. It's perfect for the undergrad in trying to learn a business education because they're actually working on starting a small business. I don't think that there's anything better. And so what we do is, after some consultation, we give them $1,000 coupled with a Kickstarter campaign to get them going. And you can buy a computer and internet access and a little bit of manufacturing materials and inventory for under $1,000. I mean, a Chromebook is $250 now. So it's not going to cost a lot of money to get started, essentially. And then the whole idea is to push them off into the credit union. So now we have a business with some credit history and now an investment opportunity for one credit union. And now let's say that the loan is they actually need $100,000. 2 credit unions could make a loan to one business, or even 3, or 4. And then that way, we're diversifying where all of the investment is coming from throughout the city to institutions who then could provide financial services to the unbanked. We're going to take this idea one step further, and we'd like to create investment opportunities for all of the credit unions so that they can instantaneously diversify. The way that it works is there's large amounts of building stock here in the Bronx, and a lot of them need to be retrofitted by the end of the year because there's a new building code coming in. It's part of Plan New York City, and whether they like it or not, they're going to have to do it. So imagine I'm putting online a project for a building retrofit. I have a 2-minute pitch. I've got a business plan, some financials, and it's basically uploaded like a Facebook page. I'm going to need a lot more than financing to get that building retrofit done. So then I'm partnered with the best architect, the best construction guy, the best triple pane window guy, the electrician, every contractor that I would ever need to get the job done. Each of these contractors would be rated like Angie's List, so I know I'm getting the best and the brightest. It's a good idea for the contractor because then they can get a steady stream of business and also highlight their portfolio all in one place. Then, after they're partnered with the contractors, the financial institutions get involved. They basically bid on the projects with the best teams, and then the credit union, who only has $500,000 in assets, can invest $1,000 in the $1 million retrofit project, which they previously couldn't invest in. And basically it allows the credit unions to instantaneously diversify and allocate their money in such a way that it's community development means. The other thing too is we could rate the credit unions or the CDFIs on their ability to reinvest money. So let's say they made $6,000 from the building retrofit. If they invested in a Fight-A-Site tax program to prepare free taxes for folks and ultimately get the earned income tax credit that they're going to receive into a bank account and banking the unbanked, they would receive a higher priority for investment. And so some of the things that I want to talk about in terms of investment that they could do with some of that money is first they could partner with the 550 check cashers across the city. Basically what would happen is if I'm a member of this institution, I could go and deposit my check or withdraw some money from each of the 550 locations in New York City. This costs a lot of money from the credit union's end, which is why they don't do it currently. But if they had some money, they could become instantly accessible to the populations that they want to serve, and even more so than Chase. They would have a larger infrastructure than Chase, despite running in a church basement. The second thing that they could do is offer a debit card. There's a movement in Oakland, California to offer a municipal debit card, and oftentimes a lot of undocumented immigrants don't have any form of identification, so if they get hit by a bus, it's really difficult to figure out where they are, and who to talk to figure it out. It's a really important issue to solve, and something that we could be offering is debit cards. But MasterCard won't talk to you unless you have $500 million in total assets. It's crazy. And the third thing, which is really the future of banking, is mobile platforms. Many of these people are remitting money to other economies, and it's probably why the Bronx remains the poorest congressional district in the country, because a lot of the money made here goes off to other economies. I mean, it basically supports the Caribbean economy, if you really think about it. So these are some ideas that I've had in terms of opportunities and in the banking industry and that we could be doing to ultimately increase opportunity and spur businesses here in the Bronx. So that's pretty much it. These are my some photos, and I really thank you for this.
Andrew, excellent, very inspiring. I remember some of your comments from last year, and it's just wonderful to see how you continue to build on your thoughts. A very long morning, but you have to be inspired. You have to be inspired by this opportunity that many of the speakers have talked about, marrying up, to use the words of some of the other speakers, what are challenges, but a great opportunity because of what this technology can do and unlocking the potential that the Bronx has. So I for one, continue to be very, very inspired. And now I think it's an excellent time to invite our panel up so you can get a little bit more dialogue going and to build upon some of these things. So, Tara, see if you could come up and the panelists along with you, we can get into this dialogue.
Right.
If you look at the brochure, one of the panelists' names was left out, George Torres of Sofrito Media Group, and I apologize, George. I think we need a startup to invent some software that will do a better check. Right, there's an opportunity, I think.
Well, I think so far we've just had some very exciting discussions and clearly some well-demonstrated proof points as well. I've assembled here our panelists. They're very distinguished individuals. They have very lengthy bios, and I wish I could go into great depth on all of them, but what I do have up here available to everyone is a copy of the bio. I do encourage you, please come and take a copy with you so that you have a little more background. I'm going to do some very cursive introductions here myself. But let me first introduce myself. I'm Teresita Bay Kruger. I'm a partner with Latin Business Today. We are an online publication, and we are a national publication, and our focus area is around empowering, mentoring, inspiring, and enabling small, medium business entrepreneurs and startups. And I'm happy to chat with anyone about the publication later today if you'd like. So let me just begin with, again, some very, very short introductions of our panelists, and then I do recommend that folks do pick up their bios here. Josh Clayman, who is the executive of the National Student Initiative, a very strong advocate of innovation and effective youth education we have here on our panel today. Thank you, Josh, for coming. Monica Mitchell, a true social entrepreneur. She's considered one of the top 100 thought leaders on the emerging social business and economy. So we are very pleased to have Monica with us today. She posts quite a bit to the Huffington Post, by the way, and two of her last subject areas that she talked about, which really I was very interested in, was around this concept of, I think she calls it the 5 Ps, which is the passion, purpose, plan, partner, and profitability, and what it really means to be a social entrepreneur. So please welcome Monica. Nadia Munoz is herself an attorney and an entrepreneur on her own. She founded her own law firm, Munoz Law, and she provides quite a number of services around IP protection, counsel services with her background in her area of expertise, with an IP portfolio management history in her career. She's racking up quite a number of best-of-breed clients in the graphic design and digital area, so she's someone that would be easy to talk to after our panel discussion today. Miguel Sanchez, who I might say is someone that really was kind of the impetus behind, I think, both the first summit and this summit. He has been featured in the past in both the New York Times and the Daily News. His entrepreneurial startup is really a team of very eclectic animators and designers and web developers in the rich multimedia, emerging multimedia side of the business. I mean, I could rattle off a number of his clients and customers, Mont Blanc being one of them, Justin Bieber another. But what's very interesting about where he innovates is what I really like. It's in his kind of innovation, and it's at the Sunshine Bronx Business Incubator. If you know where that is. That is in the historic banknote building at Hunts Point. Patrick Sullivan, who you heard from earlier today, our Google Meister, is a Bronx native as well, so that's a double yay, I think, from my perspective. And, it's clear from his background in music licensing that, he really knows what it's like to monetize your idea and your business. So he's also the recipient of a number of awards. One of the features is the White Hunger Award, which is really a recognition also of his philanthropic contributions. So I'm so happy to have him. He's doing double duty with us here, and it's just fabulous that he could spend all this time. And then last but not least, a gentleman, George Torres of Sofrito Media Group, which he founded. He is clearly the quintessential voice of a New Yorican here experience in the Bronx, hence his nickname, Urban Jibaro. And also the recipient of a number of awards, but a key one is the Hispanicized Latino Impact Award. And by the way, George, he's very, very busy, but he also does a number of participations in panels at a number of institutions. We're very fortunate to have him here today at Durham. So with that, thank you. So with that, I want to begin, folks here on the panel, I really want to begin where we left off just about a year ago with the first Bronx Summit, and it's with, do you envision the Bronx will look like or be a kind of, I'll say, East Coast Silicon Valley? And I'm opening that up really for comment from each and every one of you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to start on my left. Patrick, would you mind making a comment about that?
You know, I think the presentation with Philip was very interesting, you know, and then the viewpoint of the number of people and the space. And I think, you know, I'm always thinking and I'm always planning, and I do look at space, commercial real estate, and, you know, even where I had my space in Manhattan on 22nd Street, 6th was prime real estate, but the market's changed. So I would say that is a primary driver for people starting businesses, location, and I think that, you know, for me, the Bronx has that opportunity. I think that the key now, especially that presentation I thought was brilliant, is messaging that, and I think that we can shift away from people thinking about Brooklyn, which is to be overly priced in the same way that, you know, the downtown, Flatiron district where I was really one of the earliest incubators of startups. You can shift the people to think that way, and the train logistics, people will come here. You know? So I think, yes, I think the Bronx has that opportunity. I think it's just a key now to message that.
Josh, please.
So I think something that Silicon Valley has out west that's really integral to any startup ecosystem is the schools that provide the entrepreneurs, the engineers, the finance people, the designers, everything else. The nice thing about the Bronx, what we have here that Brooklyn doesn't really have, Queens doesn't have, Staten Island doesn't have, is really a top-tier university. This is basically the best asset for building a startup community, and it's a good thing we're realizing this here, because this is probably the best spark to start the community.
Just to piggyback off of, a few things that everybody said, and I appreciate what you were talking about. I think branding and imaging is big. You can change the way people think by changing the image of something. So I wanted to kind of connect the dots a little bit. If anybody has ever remembered what Manhattan looked like at one point, or what Brooklyn looked like. And believe me, it wasn't so different from parts of the Bronx that are suffering right now. I remember it. So I came to college in New York before Giuliani became the mayor, and it was a different city. I don't know if anybody knows Avenue D in Alphabet City, but I was there. A friend of mine had an apartment. She was a painter, an artist, and there were gunshots going across the living room. We had a gun down. Now it's like one of the hippest neighborhoods in New York, and I'm telling you, there weren't beautiful brownstones there. There weren't lovely apartments. It was projects, and there are still projects there. But there is police presence, and there's renovation going on around it. And right now, that particular area is the hottest spot that people want to be in when they move to New York. That's where they want to get an apartment. That's where a lot of the entrepreneurs and digital media people go. It's got great clubs and entertainment, and it took 20 years. So in terms of the long term, somebody was talking about that before, about long-term investment, you got to kind of be in it and stay in it. I think I remember as a kid coming here with a friend of mine, one of the first places I saw, aside from Manhattan, which my mother was a fashion model, so we were back and forth. But in Manhattan was gorgeous, and then I had a friend who came from Mount Vernon and Arthur Avenue. And so I had two worlds, Fifth Avenue and 86th Street, and Arthur Avenue and Mount Vernon. We saw the difference. And in fact, I was totally charmed by the Bronx. So I can understand how you fell in love with it. it was just this diverse and passionate and vibrant community that I think is still here. So I think you don't reinvent the wheel. I think what Andrew's doing is incredibly, very, very innovative. I love it. I love what you're doing. I think those are great ideas to put it into the 21st century. I think that's what's missing here. But to also use what you have and then turn it digital is where the opportunity is. But to just basically use what worked for other places and redo it, reinvent it for this modern age. And I think that's a lot of what you're doing.
Yes, I'm a Brooklyn boy, but I actually grew up a couple of blocks away from this campus, and on 187th and Cortona. So I happened to see Brooklyn and the Bronx in its worst days. I think that when I look at a problem or solving any type of issue, I look at root cause. And I think education is the biggest piece in terms of, we already know that the New York City schools are failing, and that conversation is way beyond the scope of this conference. But I think that, and I'll just say this, I went to the United Nations Social Good Conference 2 weeks ago as one of the fellowship members. And one of the things that will.i.am said during his presentation was, if we want to see a change in 2030, which was the theme of the conference, we have to educate the 5-year-olds today. So it's really about taking those children today, those preschoolers that are going into kindergarten, going into the public schools, charter schools, whatever they do, and shaping their minds and build that entrepreneurial spirit within them. And I think that in 20 years from now, we can see something similar to that tomorrow.
Yeah.
I agree with George. I grew up in the Bronx, 6 blocks away from Yankee Stadium. My parents didn't want to put me in Bronx schools, so they put me in Harlem schools, which was not that much better, but it was much better than the Bronx. So I would come back and I would feel the difference in education level, and I feel that now that divide is a little bit less, but it's still a huge divide. And I think a lot of our people unfortunately focus on sports and stuff like that to put your kids in. And a lot of what we've been talking about is maybe creating a school for learning how to program, learning how to make a business plan at 5 years old. Because with me, I grew up in, pretty much one of the worst areas during the crack era, and I didn't really know much about business. I just knew I wanted to do bigger things than what was around me. So my parents put me into art school and stuff like that, and I stayed with that, and I still live in the Bronx. And the reason why I came to the incubator, I was the first person to take space, was because I felt like if I could do it, maybe somebody else say, I can do it too. And now the incubator is pretty full, all kinds of businesses, healthcare, any type of business you can think of. And I feel like that kind of thinking is what rooms like this have to do. Like you said, the bigger the opportunity, the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. You have to figure out how to take these young people and make them feel like it is possible. And that's, luckily, I just rolled myself into that. But looking at the young, and I don't see a privileged 5-year-old. I just see it undereducated. And when I go to anywhere, people are always coming up to me with ideas and business ideas, but they don't know how to get them to the next step. And if we can, as parents and mentors, can teach from a young age, this is how you do it. I can see the Bronx change. You build it, it'll come. And it happened, like you said, in Brooklyn, downtown Manhattan. I've seen it as well. And even around Yankee Stadium, you see it. So it just needs to expand inside areas, and hopefully this can make it very far.
Thank you. And now
Sure. I am also on the same bandwagon as education is the key to really changing the way things are right now, and also with the brand. The Bronx is in itself a brand, and yet what it's known for is not really translating well into the rest of the country, to the rest of New York. So it's about really pivoting that message and what I like to call code switching. I think Patrick really spoke on that, which is when he went to Google, he didn't go to Google on his own. He got someone on his team that really helped him speak the Google terms and the Google language. And so what we have to do here in the Bronx is really educate the kids, 5-year-olds, and educate the people that are here, the community, to empower themselves and and to not only be the next wave of the tech community, but really be the service providers on that next wave of the tech community. And so I think that that's a good starting point to really making changes in the Bronx.
Thank you. So that was the softball question. Now let's get a little more in-depth and deep dive, and I just want to call on some of you specifically with regard to this question. So.